The hum of the central air conditioning was the only sound in the house, a constant, lower that usually lulled me to sleep. But that night, it felt like the anxious buzz of a trapped insect. I was 16, and my world had already been tilted on its axis 2 years prior when my mom married Mark. My room, a sanctuary of soft blue walls, band posters, and the familiar clutter of textbooks and sketchpads, felt like the only place where the axis was still straight. My name is Chloe. Mark wasn't a monster. That's what made it so confusing. He didn't have a villain sneer or a cruel glint in his eye. He was a broad-shouldered, quiet man, a financial advisor who wore polo shirts on weekends and kept the lawn meticulously manicured. He was the kind of man who gave a firm handshake and remembered your birthday, but whose eyes never quite seemed to be in on the conversation. To the outside world, we were the perfect blended family. My mom, Sarah, glowed with a second-chance happiness I desperately wanted to be happy for. But behind the closed doors of our suburban Michigan home, a quiet chill had settled. It was the little things. The way he'd critique my posture at the dinner table. The subtle comments about my friends being distractions. The way his presence in a room made the air feel thin, like I had to consciously remember to breathe. He never yelled, never raised a hand. His control was a silent, creeping vine, tightening almost imperceptibly. That particular night, a sticky, humid Tuesday in late July, the tension was thicker than usual. I'd been accepted into a summer art program at a college 3 states away, a dream opportunity I'd worked for all year. My portfolio had won a scholarship. But Mark had decided it was a waste of time and money, a distraction from my real studies. The dinner table debate had been a masterclass in passive aggression. It's not a practical path, Chloe, he'd said, calmly cutting his pork chop. Art is a hobby, not a career. You need to focus on STEM. Your math scores are slipping. My mom had sat between us, her eyes darting back and forth, a nervous smile plastered on her face. Well, honey, Mark has a point about stability. But the scholarship does cover most of it. It's not about the money, Sarah, Mark said, his voice a patient, reasonable drone that made my skin crawl. It's about steering her toward a secure future. This program is full of, well, let's just say it attracts a certain type of aimless individual. I'd stormed off to my room, the heat of frustrated tears pricking my eyes. I'd slammed the door, a childish act of defiance I immediately regretted because it gave him a reason to be the offended adult. For hours, I'd lain on my bed, staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars I'd stubbornly refused to take down from my ceiling, listening to the muffled, tense tones of their conversation downstairs. I heard my mom's placating murmurs and the steady, low rumble of Mark's voice. I felt a familiar, bitter disappointment. She would fold. She always did. His calm, logical authority always trumped her maternal instincts. Eventually, the house fell silent. The digital clock on my nightstand glowed 2:17 a.m. I'd finally drifted into a fitful, angry sleep, my sketchbook open on my chest, a half-finished charcoal drawing of a bird in flight smudged under my hand. The creak of my door opening was soft, but in the dead silence of the night, it was as jarring as a gunshot. My eyes flew open. The hallway light framed his large silhouette in the doorway. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. This had never happened before. My room was my territory. He never came in, not even to tell me dinner was ready. That was my mom's job. Chloe. His voice was a low whisper, but it carried across the room with an unnerving clarity. I froze, pretending to be asleep, my body rigid beneath the comforter. I could hear my own blood pulsing in my ears. The floorboards groaned under his weight as he stepped inside. He closed the door behind him with a soft, definitive click. The click echoed in the stillness. It felt like the locking of a cage. He was in my space. The air shifted, now carrying the faint scent of his aftershave and the clean laundry smell of his t-shirt. He just stood there, for what felt like an eternity, looking down at me. I could feel his gaze on me, heavy and intrusive. I kept my breathing slow and even, a poor imitation of sleep, every muscle in my body screaming with tension. Why was he here? Was he going to yell at me for slamming the door? Was this about the art program? Then, I heard him move. Not toward me, but toward my desk. The soft rustle of papers. He was looking through my things. My stomach churned with a fresh wave of violation. He was going through my sketchbook. I heard the soft thwap of pages being turned. My private thoughts, my dreams, my fears, all spilled out in graphite and ink. He was inspecting them like a detective at a crime scene. I risked cracking an eye open, just a sliver. The moonlight through my window illuminated his profile. He wasn't looking at my art with curiosity or even disdain. His expression was one of intense, analytical focus. He was studying me. After a few minutes that felt like hours, he stopped at a specific page. It was a drawing I'd done just a few days prior. It was a simple, but emotional piece for me, a single, gnarled oak tree on a hill, its branches stretching out toward a stormy sky. On one of the lower branches, I'd drawn a small, detailed bird cage. The door was swinging open, and the cage was empty. He let out a soft, almost imperceptible breath. It wasn't a sigh of anger or disappointment. It sounded different, softer. He closed the sketchbook and placed it back on the desk with a care that surprised me. Then, he did something that shocked me to my core. He walked over to my bed and sat down on the very edge of the mattress. The springs groaned under his weight, and I instinctively flinched, my act of sleeping breaking. I squeezed my eyes shut again, but it was too late. "I know you're awake, Chloe," he said. His voice wasn't angry. It was tired. Deeply, profoundly tired. I didn't move, didn't speak. My mind was racing, a frantic scramble of fear and confusion. He didn't touch me. He just sat there, his back to me, looking toward the window. "I saw your drawing," he said quietly. "The tree, the empty cage." I remained silent, my heart pounding a bruising rhythm against my sternum. "For what it's worth," he continued, his voice so low I had to strain to hear it, "it's very good. The emotion in it, it's powerful. This was not the script I had in my head. This was not the Mark one knew. Where was the criticism, the lecture about practicality?" He was silent for another long moment, and the quiet felt different now, charged, fragile. "My father," he began, and then stopped, as if the words were physically difficult to form. "My father was a very practical man. An engineer. He believed the world was made of equations and blueprints. Things you could measure and control." I slowly, cautiously, opened my eyes. I could see the tense line of his shoulders silhouetted against the window. "He wanted me to be an engineer, too," Mark went on. "But I loved woodworking. I loved taking a piece of rough, raw wood and feeling its grain, seeing the shape hidden inside it. I built a birdhouse once, when I was about your age. Carved little details into it, made a tiny, functioning shutter for the window. I was so proud of it." He paused, and I heard him swallow hard. He took one look at it and called it a frivolous waste of potential. He said I was wasting my mind on trinkets. He made me break it apart with a hammer and use the wood for kindling. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. I thought of all the times he'd called my art a hobby. "I did what he wanted," Mark whispered, the words barely audible. "I got my MBA. I became successful. I provide. I control what I can. This house, the lawn, the finances, your future." He said the last two words with a bitterness that surprised me. "I thought I was protecting you. Steering you away from disappointment." He finally turned his head, and in the dim light, I saw his face. The usual mask of impassive control was gone. In its place was a raw, naked pain I had never seen before. His eyes were glistening. "I looked at that drawing, Chloe," he said, his voice cracking. "That empty cage. And I saw myself. I've spent my whole life building cages. For myself. And now, I'm trying to build one for you." The world tilted. The image of Mark, my stoic, unyielding stepfather, as a boy being forced to destroy something he loved, shattered the villain I had constructed in my head. He wasn't a monster, he was a ghost, haunted by the ghost of his own father. "I am so sorry," he said, and the apology was so genuine, so heavy with regret, that the last of my defensive anger crumbled. "I've been trying to parent you out of my own fear. Not out of what's best for you. Your talent, it's a gift. It scared me because I didn't understand it. I still don't. But that's my problem, not yours." He stood up abruptly, as if the vulnerability was too much to bear. He walked to the door and paused, his hand on the knob. "You should go to that art program," he said, without turning around. "You have my full support. And your mother's. I'll make sure of it." And then he was gone. The door clicked shut, leaving me alone in the dark, the hum of the air conditioner once again the only sound. But everything was different. The air didn't feel thin anymore. It felt charged with a new, terrifying, and exhilarating possibility. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I lay there, replaying the conversation, watching the image of the stern, practical Mark disintegrate and be replaced by this new, complicated, wounded man. The man who loved woodworking. The man who was forced to burn his own birdhouse. The next morning, I came downstairs hesitantly. My mom was at the stove, making pancakes. She gave me a tentative smile. Morning, sweetie. Mark was at the kitchen table, reading the newspaper, a cup of coffee in front of him. He looked up as I entered. For a split second, our eyes met. There was no grand acknowledgement, no tearful hug. But there was a new understanding in his gaze. A quiet, shared truth. "Chloe," he said, his voice back to its usual even tone, but lacking the critical edge. "Your mother and I talked. We think the art program is a wonderful opportunity. I've already looked into the logistics. We can drive you down there the weekend before it starts to get you settled." My mom turned from the stove, her face a mixture of surprise and relief. "Isn't that great, honey?" I just nodded, my throat too tight to speak. The change was so abrupt, so complete, it was dizzying. The weeks that followed were a period of quiet, gradual thaw. Mark didn't suddenly become a warm, fuzzy father figure. He was still Mark, quiet, reserved, a man of routine. But the criticism stopped. The subtle put-downs ceased. He started asking questions about my art, not with judgment, but with a genuine, if awkward, curiosity. He once asked me to explain the concept of negative space in a drawing. He even, one Saturday afternoon, invited me into the garage. In the back, under a dusty tarp, was a beautiful, old workbench, covered in tools. "This was my grandfather's," he said, running a hand over the scarred wood. "I haven't used it in years." He didn't say anything else, but the invitation was clear. I went to the art program. It was everything I dreamed it would be and more. I met other, aimless individuals, who saw the world in colors and shapes, and I felt like I had found my tribe. When my parents came to pick me up at the end of the summer, I had a portfolio bursting with new work and a confidence I'd never known. At the final exhibition, I had displayed my favorite piece, a sculpture. It was a human figure, carved from a single block of wood, its arms outstretched. From its open hands, I had fashioned delicate, metal wings, and fixed them so they seemed to be just taking flight. It was called, Kindling. Mark stood in front of it for a long time. My mom was chattering about how proud she was, but he was silent. When he finally turned to me, his eyes were wet. He didn't say a word. He just put a hand on my shoulder and squeezed. It was the first time he had ever touched me with something that felt like pride. That night, 2 years ago, when my stepfather entered my room, he didn't come as an adversary. He came as a man breaking a long, painful cycle. He saw his own caged spirit reflected in my art, and in a moment of profound courage, he chose to hand me the key instead of locking the door tighter. What happened in my room that night didn't just change my summer, or my career path. It changed our entire family. It taught me that sometimes, the people who seem the most rigid are often the ones fighting the hardest, quietest battles against the ghosts of their own past. It taught me that forgiveness isn't about excusing bad behavior, but about understanding the wound that caused it. And it taught me that change, the kind that changes everything, often doesn't happen with a bang, but with a quiet, late-night conversation, a shared moment of vulnerability, and the courage to finally set each other free.